Good morning and welcome to 365 Days of Amazing Stories with Theo Mayer. Here we are on day 107, and the story I'm going to begin is called He Wins Who Waits. Once there was a king in a land far away from here, and he had an only daughter. And she had been pampered all her life, spoiled, we could say, and was used to getting her way. But on top of that, she was clever and beautiful. And the combination, well, she was used to getting her way and insisting upon it. Now, when she became of age to be married, she would have nothing to do with the prince that her father favored. She wouldn't even talk to him. And when her father asked her about this, her reply was that she would pick her own husband. He knew her well enough to realize that, well, if this is what she says, this is the way it's going to be. And there's no point in me trying to persuade her to do something different than that because she won't do it. So he resigned himself to that. Some days later, he asked how she was going to choose her husband. And she said, "Father, gather all the young men in the kingdom a month and a day from today, and from those I will choose. You see this golden apple?" She had a golden apple in her hand. "Who I give this golden apple to, that man will be my husband." "Oh, but wait, this is not the way to choose a husband," her father began. But with more vigor and louder than before, she said, "I will give this golden apple to the one who will be my husband." Resigning himself to her desires, knowing that that was the only way, he sent out a proclamation, and 1 month and a day from that day, all the young men in the kingdom arrived and began to assemble themselves in rows in the royal courtyard. They arrived tall, short, fair, not so fair, heavy set, limber and light, handsome, not so handsome, dark-skinned, light-skinned. All these young men arrived. Some dressed better than others, rich, poor, all were there. The princess came out. She was dressed in a beautiful green garment with a yellow veil. And she began to walk back and forth through the rows of men. Occasionally, she would hesitate for a moment, looking into the eyes of one man or another, but she always continued on her way, looking, until in the last row, she came upon a man and looked into his eyes. And he met her gaze and smiled. And there was something in him, an honest way about him that she could not deny. And she handed him the golden apple and turned to her father and said, "This man will be my husband." Well, the king was like, no, wait, this can't be. No, you've made some mistake. You need to go through the rows again and pick someone else. This is a poor widow's son. This won't do. The princess agreed, and she went through the rows again and stopped again in front of the widow's son, handed him the apple and said, "This will be my husband." And again, the king was like, "No, you have to go through the rows again. Certainly there is another man more suitable than him." She went through the rows again and handed the apple to the widow's son. The king said, "Fine, fine, have him as your husband, but you will not stay here." Well, the princess interlocked her arm with the arm of the widow's son, and off they went out of the palace and away from the king. That evening they were married, and after that, the widow's son took his new wife, the princess, to his home. And when they got there, the princess was like, "Whoa, this house is no bigger than a hen's coop." It was teeny and not very well kept. Well, it was well kept, but it wasn't in the best of repair. And when she went into the house, there the widow was. The young man's mother was there. She was like, "Oh, this is great. You bring a bride like this into our home? We are poor enough as it is. How will she earn any income at all? Look at her. She's unable to do anything." She went on in not the nicest of ways for greeting her new daughter-in-law. But the princess was not flustered by this and stroked her arm gently and said, "Oh, mother, don't worry. I am a famous spinner, and I can sit at my wheel all day, and I will work each and every day to earn income." She did as she said. Every day she spun. But despite her efforts and her husband's, they grew poorer and poorer. And finally, after about 6 months, it was decided that he would go off and try to seek his fortune elsewhere. Well, he went to the neighboring town. And there, in the neighboring town, he was like going through, seeking if there was any employment anywhere. And he came across a merchant that was just about to embark on a journey across the desert with a string of camels laden with goods. And this merchant was looking for someone to help him. The young man, the youth, begged to be taken into his employment. And the merchant sized him up and thought, "Wow, this looks like a strong, well, honest young man." Okay. He agreed. And the merchant also gave the young man his entire year's wages in advance. Well, the youth took that money. He went back to his home, gave the money to his wife and his mother, told them the news of what was going to happen, and returned. And the next day they were gone. The caravan started on their way across the desert. Now, there were places along the route, of course, to get water. And the merchants who traveled that trade route knew where they were. And at the end of the first day, as the evening was setting, they came upon a place where there were many wells. But there were also many other merchants that had arrived there before them. And what water had been in the wells was gone. It had been very dry. Had not rained for quite some time. It was a dire situation, not only for the merchant and his string of camels and his men, but also for the other merchants as well. They had nowhere to get water. They were parched, They had some bit of water that was stored in water sacks, typically, made from the parts of animals that were then turned into water sacks. Now, there was a well that had an abundance of water that was about half a mile away from where they had stopped. But it was known to be enchanted, and the story was that anyone who went down into this well to get water never came back up. But the merchants who had arrived before them, they had gotten together and they had all agreed that they would give a great sum of money. Each one would contribute to the man, whoever it was, who would go down into that well to get water. Well, the next morning, a herald came through the camp, and the young man, the youth, the widow's son, was wakened by this proclamation that anyone who would go down into the well would receive a great sum of money. And when he heard this, he came out from the tent. He thought about it a little bit. He said, "I will go." Now, his master was like, "No, what are you doing? You are way too young to be throwing your life away going down into that well. No one has ever come up. But if you do, I will give you a camel's load worth of goods, whatever you wish for, and my best mule on top of it." He tapped his turban and went back into his tent, bidding the youth basically a farewell. Well, all of the men heard that this young man had decided that he would go down. They came out, they surrounded him, and they said, "We have got the rope here for you to go down in bags, and we're so thankful that you will go down and save us from this fate that we are in without water." The young man said, "Let us go." And they went down or across the desert to where the well was. And they knotted the rope around his chest and under his arms and gently lowered him down into the well. Well, when the youth got to the bottom of the well, there was a beautiful stream of water that was flowing, and hard rocks to stand upon where he could bend down to get a drink and also to fill this bladder for water. And just as he was about to take a sip, a voice said, "Who are you? Stand and follow me." And the youth turned and looked up, and there before him was a very big man, an Arab, who had called to him. The youth stood up and followed. And we'll leave the story there. Find out what happens tomorrow. Thanks for joining. Have a great rest of your day.